Good morning. How is everybody? Connor, you want to pray for us?
Spread the words out to us that we can understand them, God, Lord, that we can apply it to our life this week, Lord. Lord, we ask that you just touch this our services, Lord. We just pray. Amen.
Amen. Just like David said this morning, I almost constantly have to fight myself to keep myself from trying to be in control of my own life. Even in just the smallest things, I feel like sometimes that I can just insert myself into it just a little bit and it'll mess up God's plan in my life. But if I can stay focused on Him, even when it don't seem like it's the right thing to do, somehow He always turns it around and makes it the way it's supposed to be, don't He? What kind of car was that you bought for $300, David?
61 Ford Fairlane, 2-door hardtop.
Well, Alan said it's probably a Model A. So.
That's what I thought you were going to say.
My first car was a Mazda 626, and I paid the neighbor like $80.
Oh, well.
My dad had to like redo the whole car.
Well, $80 car.
It lasted like 5 or 6 years on my whole high school. So I was happy.
Well, I'd like to buy a few of them for $80 myself. If you can run it for 5 or 6 years, you've done pretty good. If you will, turn over to Acts chapter 20 this morning. Acts chapter 20, we're going to start in verse 9. I'll give you just another second to get there. Acts 20, verse 9. And there sat in the window a certain young man named Eutychus, being fallen into a deep sleep. And as Paul was long preaching, he sunk down with sleep and fell down from the third loft and was taken up dead. And Paul went down and fell on him and embraced him and said, Trouble not yourselves, for his life is in him. When he therefore was come up again and had broken bread and eaten and talked a long while, even till break of day, so he departed. And they brought the young man alive and were not a little comforted. Who knows that there's a danger in falling asleep in church? Who's ever done it? I've sat right back there and fell asleep before. That's the honest truth about it. This young man was sitting, I imagined as I read this that he was sitting kind of leaned up against the, what's it called, the sash? Sitting on the windowsill with his back leaned up against it. And I imagine that he just simply fell asleep. And as I studied it out, I didn't realize it says that he fell from the third story. And there's a debate whether he fell outside the church or whether he fell inside. But either way, it says that he was dead. when he fell. I imagined always that he fell outside and fell 3 stories to his death. But Paul, being the preacher that he was, knew what to do, didn't he? He went straight out there and prayed the prayer of faith over him. God put his life back in him, and he came back and finished his message. This was Paul's 3rd missionary journey, and he ended up here in Troas. But it's close to the end of his time here with them. He didn't stay very long. And as he was about to leave, this account happens the night before he's set to leave. And it says that it's a full house, and he preached from 12 o'clock in the day till 12 o'clock at night. Now that'd be some rough preaching and some rough sitting through it, wouldn't it? I almost can't blame him for falling asleep. Now, if Eric was to get up here in a little while and say, I'm going to preach till 12 o'clock tonight, raise your hand if you'd still be here at 12 o'clock tonight. Got one person. Phyllis? From 12 o'clock in the day to 12 o'clock at night. They're up here in the upper room. It says there were many lamps lit. And, of course, Paul's long-winded. And he's sitting in the windowsill and falls asleep, falls out the window, and he's dead. Now, who knows who the book of Acts was wrote by? It was wrote by Luke. And what was his profession? So Luke would be able to tell whether or not he was dead, right? He was not knocked out. He was not just stunned. Luke writes in his word that the young man fell out and was dead. There's no question about it. He would be able to tell, to distinguish between the living and the dead. He falls 3 stories and is dead. So you have to be clear there. Now, Paul is a man of faith. He goes downstairs, and it says that he falls on top of him and prays the prayer of faith over him. I don't know if I would even think to do that or not. Would you? I'd say call the ambulance. You know, we had the lady in here that passed out that time, and the first thought that came to my mind was get on the phone and call the ambulance. And I don't guess they had ambulances back then, but Paul went down there and used what he had. He had faith, and he had God, and God touched him and brought him back to life. And it says they were not a little bit comforted. It means that they were a lot comforted when they saw this happen. And that would comfort me if I could see somebody be touched and brought back to life. So he prays for him, brings him back to life, and goes up and finishes his message. But as we read this entire account, what's the first thing we want to do when we talk about Eutychus? Say it louder. We want to fault him for falling asleep. Now, his name is left here for a reason. The first thing we think of when we hear the name Eutychus, he's the young man who fell asleep, right? A lot of us would probably say he's just a typical teenager. He's probably out partying all night last night and just couldn't stay awake that long. He fell out and got hurt. But the thing about it all is, he was in church. He was there. And a lot of the time, the people that will fault Eutychus for falling asleep and falling out the window wouldn't have been there. As we talk about this young man, and I had to put this in here somewhere. I wanted to put it. I actually wanted to put it at the end, but I ended up having to put this at the very start of my lesson here, and we're going to call this a bonus point. We should never take for granted each and every young person that's here today, because next year they may not be here. Who's ever been to a church that didn't have any young people in it? I went to one for a while. It was a dead church. Point number 1. This is a bonus point. Eutychus was a young man in church. And we cannot fault him for falling out of that window. We need to remember that he was a young person, he was in church, and he was trying to do good. He,
preacher one time, and he said that the way to know a dying church is that they don't have crying babies and crying new Christian babies.
that's exactly right.
He said to have a healthy church should have that.
Well, if you don't have that in a few years, you're not going to have anything.
I've heard preachers preach, you won't go to sleep.
Preach that what?
You want to go to sleep. We're laughing, but back when we lived at Cornerstone for a period, and when we were struggling, Lane and I went to church every Sunday, and I'm telling you, most of them I went to sleep in. I mean, those spirits were sitting there pinching bruises on my legs. I come home with blue legs where I pinched myself trying to stay awake.
Yeah,
I mean, there was no spirit. And when you've had that, everything else is boring.
that's right. Once you've experienced the anointing
Amen.
and been somewhere where there is an anointing,
That's why we scare people. We scare people to death. I mean, people come here for a service, and we have a good. God shows up, and then I see him a couple weeks later, and invite them back, and you can tell it's just they've never experienced that, and they're scared. And a builder brought his wife here, and he said she could every time she comes, she wouldn't stop crying. And he's thinking it makes her feel guilty, and finally I just come out and said there's conviction. I said she's under conviction. He said, what's that? I mean, but they haven't been back.
well,
How many of you grew up in a church that where children were supposed to be seen and not heard? That's where I grew up. I cannot even, and the church that I grew up is a dead church. In the next 10 years, I don't know if it will survive. Good people, and I love them. But it's a dead church. And to not celebrate these children running around wide open, healthy, breaks my heart.
well, that's the thing about it. I mean, we got all these kids back here in the back, and sometimes when you're preaching, you can hear the floors back there just rumbling, and they're back there having a big old time. But the thing about it is, in 20 years, what are they going to be? What are they going to be for Cornerstone? And we got these young people who have just got saved and they're in here, and we had the young man pray last week, and there was power in that.
Absolutely.
And in a few years, I could actually see him and Connor and all these young people. I could see him holding a position here in this church.
Absolutely.
But whose responsibility is it to make that grow?
Amen.
What's our class here? Cornerstone what? Adult Sunday school class, right? We have got to make a path for these younger people.
Absolutely.
We cannot let them down. Now, I'm getting off here, so we cannot take for granted the young people that we have, both spiritually and physically, here at Cornerstone. Now, Eutychus did fall asleep, but in his defense, Paul had preached 12 hours, and he was there for 12 hours. He was hanging right in there with them, wasn't he? We had one person in here that said that they would stay for 12 hours. And he proved that he would stay that long. There's something to be said for that. Now, as I studied this out yesterday, I thought about this. How many times have you ever seen a young person get their face on the news for drinking and driving or selling drugs? Or we can open up Watauga Democrat right now or Go Blue Ridge or whatever, and we'll see all these young people, such and such caught for drugs, charged with this, charged with that. But how many times do they get recognized for coming to church? They get recognized for stealing, for taking what's not theirs. But they never get recognized for giving. given for God. In other words, they get all the attention more than they want for falling asleep in life, but never get any for being awake in church. And whose fault's that? This morning I made an effort to tell Caitlin that I was proud of her for coming to church. She had no choice. She was coming to church either way. But she got up, she got ready, she did not argue, she knew she was going, and I told her that I was proud of her for coming. And when we fail to encourage that, why would they keep coming? They get attention for falling asleep, but they do not get attention for being awake in church. Just like Eutychus. He's in there for a reason. He fell asleep. But he was there because he wanted to be closer to God. I'm guilty of that. So today I encourage everybody in here, find a young person before we leave and tell them that you're happy to see them, that you're happy they're in church, and that they're doing good. The young man was in church, but the problem is he fell asleep. Now, I thought quite a bit about this yesterday, and I realized we got people asleep in church right now. There's people in this very room with us right now that are spiritually asleep.
I've never fell asleep in church. I can't sleep in church, can't sleep in a car. The only time I sleep is when I lay down, and it takes me a long time to go to sleep. But I've sat here or sat in a lot of churches dreaming, thinking about something else. My mind's over here or over there. I just will be asleep.
I'm guilty. I've done it.
That's where people are asleep at.
That's right. We got people asleep in church every Sunday, every Wednesday. Not physically. Well, maybe sometimes physically. But spiritually. Spiritually asleep. Eutychus fell asleep physically. But looking back, I thought of different times that spiritually I sat back there asleep. I should have been somewhere else, in all honesty. There was no point in me being here. I was not paying attention. I was not trying to better myself for God or better His kingdom in any way. I was spiritually asleep. So, what am I talking about? Let's define. Somebody tell me what sleep is.
That's a kind of rested state where you rejuvenate your mind and your body.
Okay, I had to look it up too. I could come up with what it does and this, that, and the other, but I couldn't give a good definition of exactly what sleep is. Now listen to what sleep is. It's a condition in which the nervous system is inactive. The eyes are closed, the muscles are relaxed, and the conscience is suspended. So when I fall asleep spiritually, I become spiritually inactive. My spiritual eyes are closed, therefore I have no vision. What happens when spiritual people have no vision? They perish, don't they? And
When you say that there's no input into the body, physically or spiritually.
that's right. And my consciousness is suspended. And it's suspended spiritually. Or I'm oblivious to the spiritual things going on around me, both good and bad. And that's kind of a scary place to be in, is it not? So let me go and say that one more time. I become spiritually inactive. My spiritual eyes are closed, therefore I have no vision. And my consciousness is suspended spiritually. Or I'm oblivious to the spiritual things, both good and bad, going on around me. Now, when something bad spiritual is going on around you, you are in a dangerous place. There is a trap set for you. There is something waiting for you. And when you cannot recognize that, what's going to happen? You're going to get caught up in it, right? You have no choice. You can't recognize it. I can come to church regularly. I can listen and not learn. And I can never put into practice the things that I should be coming here to hear and apply in my life. Somebody tell me how this happens. How do we fall asleep spiritually?
Not seeking God, not reading the Word. I felt that way before we started coming back here, honestly. And the churches we were going to is kind of like what we'd already talked about. It was more of a social gathering for a Sunday for the people in the community, and God just wasn't in it. And we just got cold, just quit feeling it, just fell asleep on it.
Well, I've been to churches before where I felt like the people there came for a social gathering, and I'll tell you what the problem is. They come for each other. They don't come for God. They come to see each other and not to find something out of that they can use to better their lives. That's right. Okay, now how does this happen to us? It happens to us spiritually just like it happened to Eutychus physically. He sat down, he became relaxed, and the next thing he knew, he was out of the window, 3 stories down with Paul laying on top of him, praying life back into him. It happens before we realize it. And one day, somehow, if we're lucky, if we're blessed, we wake up to it. And we realize I've been asleep through all the stuff that's happened to me spiritually. And look at this place it's brought me to. 3 stories down. So Eutychus became relaxed, and he fell out the window. And the next thing he knew, the preacher was on top of him praying for his life. So now somebody tell me how we keep this from happening.
Maybe stand up and not. Like, be more active. Like, if you sit down and get comfortable, then you're going to fall asleep. But if you kind of stand up and keep yourself active, you read the Word, keep going, make church more exciting for yourself. Go to seek God and receive His miracles. Maybe you won't fall asleep.
Okay, that's good. Now listen to this. How do we keep ourselves from falling asleep spiritually? It's really point number 2. Be careful where you see it. Look at verse number 9. And there sat in a window a certain young man named Eutychus, being fallen into a deep sleep. And as Paul was long preaching, he sunk down with sleep and fell down from the 3rd loft and was taken up dead. It says that he sat in a window, not by it, not near it. He sat in the window. Why would he do that?
It was hot.
Huh?
It was hot.
Well, that might have been part of it.
We're in the Middle East. They see he was getting a breeze.
If we sit near not here because we can't see out the windows, but if we sit near a window, what do we tend to do?
Look out the window.
We look out the window, don't we? When we sit in a window, we are conscious to what's going on outside the window. And when we sit in the window of the church, we're conscious to what's going on in the world. So what was he doing? He was keeping an eye on what was going on outside the church. And that's exactly what we do sometimes, is it not? We want to come in here every now and then on Wednesday, but every now and then on Sunday. But we keep a sharp eye on what's still going on out there in our lives in the world, don't we?
Yeah, it seems like we want to shut off our spiritual mind when we get in here at times, because we still got our worldly mind with us.
That's exactly right. And each and every time that I can think back that I was spiritually asleep, I would come in here and I would sit right back there or wherever it was at and think about the things that were going on in the world. Maybe what happened yesterday or what was going on at work or just whatever. I was conscious while I was here to what was going on out there. And it was as simple as that.
I went to a funeral at a church here a few months ago. When I walked into that church, that's the first thing that I noticed. The windows were clear. And that was so totally distracting. I couldn't not have noticed that as I went through that. I mean, they're clear and they were floor length, and that would be tough to try not to look at that situation.
And that's exactly what we do spiritually.
Yeah, spiritually.
If the window is clear and we're sitting close to it, we're going to look out of it. And in our spirit, we are going to sit right here in church and look out at the world and be focused on what's out there and not what's in here. I've done it. Now, we could all name somebody, and just like I said, I've used myself as an example, that wants to keep one foot in the church and one in the world. And how long does that work? It don't work very long, does it? It never works that good. It's very difficult to maintain spiritual alertness while keeping up with worldly appearances. As a matter of fact, it's impossible. Most of the time, when somebody falls, it's because they want to maintain some kind of interest in the world. Now, as I thought about this, I thought about Samson. He always had this spiritual power that almost seems like he could call on God and it would be anointed at any time to do whatever. But he would always find himself in these worldly places. Didn't he? And what did it cost him? What happened to him? He fell asleep, didn't he? And when he woke up, all his hair was cut off. All his spiritual power was gone. And it happened while he was asleep. And then it cost him his life.
How much further could he have accomplished for God had that not happened? Because of that. And I say the same thing. How much further could I be in my spiritual life with Christ if I had just totally concentrated on Him?
That's right.
God's going to accomplish what He wants to. Samson's last victory was his greatest victory. He killed more in that last go around than he ever did. But it cost Samson.
Yeah.
Samson lived, they made an open display of sport out of him. He lost his sight, lost all his dignity. And then he won the greatest battle of his life, but it cost him his life.
That's right. Whereas if he had stayed focused on God and kept his nose out of the world, there's no telling how many more battles that he would have won. But God accomplished what he was trying to do.
He would have had a more enjoyable life.
That's right.
Is the thing of it. He would have enjoyed his life more.
That's right.
He also chose to stay with a woman that betrayed him 3 times. Wasn't it the third time when he actually told her what was take his strength?
Yeah.
I mean, if a woman betrays you 3 times, or once or twice, are you still going to give her the third time?
Well, ain't no telling.
He made the choice to do that.
Yeah. Well, I think I better leave that alone. Okay, so it cost Samson his life. And the other person that I thought about right offhand was Lot's wife. She was delivered from the worldly things. She was took, but she was warned not to look back, right? But she insisted on looking back. Once again, it cost her her life. She was turned into a pillar of salt. Why do you think that she looked back?
She still had a longing for things that were there.
She wanted to see if there was anything left for her to go back to. And it cost her her life. So that's exactly what we do. We maintain worldly relationships and worldly thoughts when we should be in here with our minds on God. Now look at verse 9 again. It says, being fallen into a deep sleep. If Alan sits here and falls into a deep sleep, and we compare him to Eutychus, there's something wrong with that. The young man sat and fell into a deep sleep. It says he sunk, being fallen into a deep sleep, as Paul was long preaching and sunk down. Does anybody else find that strange? He was in a deep sleep to the point of being, as I imagined it, leaned over like you see somebody in school when they fall asleep. They lean way over their desk and slobber all over their desk and everything. But that young man sat there in church and done that. and nobody said, wake up.
Good. It's good.
Not one person in that whole church. It says it was a full house. Walked up to him and shook him and said, wake up, get your mind on what. There's something wrong with that, right?
Good.
Well, he had set himself apart. He was on the third level in a window. Probably nobody else was on that level. So he had set himself apart from the rest of them.
He did, didn't he? Okay, it says that he fell into a deep sleep. Now, I sat with my sister, Mom, Caitlin, and Angie, and if I sat there and I fall into a deep sleep and start snoring, what do you think's going to happen? I'm going to get the elbow laid to me, right? And that's exactly what should happen. And that's what should have happened to him. Somebody should have woke him up. So what am I saying? Not only should we be careful where we're sitting, we have to be careful where we sleep. Don't we? Not only should we not see it where we're going to be concerned with the world, but we should see it where we're going to be held accountable if we do doze off. In other words, if I sit next to Jim and I fall asleep, Jim's going to hold me accountable in just a few minutes. Right? Well, that's what's got to happen. We've got to hold each other accountable, don't we? If I see Eric doing something that I know's wrong and I can take him to the Bible and show him, it's my responsibility to hold him accountable. And it's his responsibility to hold me accountable.
I can't do it without you.
And if that's right. If you see me doing something that I'm not supposed to be doing and you don't hold me accountable, you're going to have to give an account for it.
Amen.
Now that's pretty scary.
Look, Deacon said that's from Melinda friend. That's a great example of preaching love.
That's exactly right. That's what I was going to use here. I have to come do it out of love. And we have to say, you're falling asleep. There's something wrong in your spiritual life. I can see. Look where it says this, that, and the other in this word. I love you enough to come tell you.
Good.
It's my responsibility to hold you accountable. And it's your responsibility to hold me accountable. And this young man, for some reason, was not held accountable when he fell asleep.
I have to come to you from a point of equality. I'm on the same level. It could easily happen to me. Not a point of superiority. I'm better than you. You should have done that. That's how we have to come. I'm thankful that this could happen to me just as easily as it has happened to you. That's how we have to come.
That's right. And you know what? I've learned, especially with Angie having her surgery here not long ago, nothing more than a text will change somebody's whole day. And something that says, I hope you're okay. I noticed you wasn't at church or whatever. If you realize that somebody knows that you wasn't there, somehow that holds you accountable to the fact that you wasn't there. How often do we do that, really? I know Jim will send us out a text every now and then and say, give somebody a call or something like that. And that's a great thing. It's a reminder to do that. But really, Jim shouldn't have to tell us to do it. We should hold ourselves accountable and hold others accountable just like the Bible tells us to do. A call, a text, a visit, anything to hold each other accountable. Now don't forget, when it's the hardest for you to get to church, when it's the hardest for you to do something for God, when it seems like it's the hardest thing for you to do, period, is when you're going to get the most out of it.
That's the truth.
Every person in this building is my responsibility. That's how every one of us should look at it.
That's right.
They're part of us, part of me, part of you. And if that part's not here, the church will go on, but it won't be the same.
Well, we're all part of the same family. It's a church family. But I care about my family sitting back there. And I should care for each and every person in here in the same kind of mindset.
I want absolutely what is best for them. As a father, as a brother, whatever it is that we need to look at from that angle. Not just me and my boy no more. It's a tough world out there. It is once we step outside this door. We need every able body together with us.
That's right. Okay, so make sure you have people in your life who, when they see you're drifting or see that you're falling asleep spiritually, will give you an elbow and make sure that you get woke up. That's what Eutychus needed in this situation that kept him from falling out the window. The long and short of it is this. Who's sitting with you in life? Who's sitting with you in church? But not only that, who's sitting with you out in the world? Because worldly people will not hold you accountable for spiritual things.
That's right. I bought a car for Aaron one time, that little green Jeep that we had over in Fleetwood. And as I was talking to the fellow who was buying it, I thought about it. You could tell by his preaching, man, he was a Christian. So I just asked him. I said, "Where you go to church at?" "Oh, we don't go to church anywhere. We have church here at home." And my first thought was, how do you survive out in the world without a church family? My second thought was, what do you do with your tithes? But
Yeah.
that was from a deacon's standpoint.
Yeah.
But my first thought was, how do you, there's not a person here I can't call and say, man, I need you to pray for me right now. And it will happen. And that man doesn't have that.
That's right.
I cannot fathom that.
Well, see, they don't know what they're missing,
Absolutely.
is what it is.
And I'm sure somewhere they've been hurt badly.
Yeah.
And you know what? It's going to happen here.
Yep.
Be patient. It will happen. We're human. But the worst fights I've ever had was with my two brothers. But they're my brothers, and I love them.
That's right.
I'd die for them in a heartbeat.
That's right. And one thing I've learned, if you're going to be faithful in anything that is kingdom related, you're going to have some thick skin to do it.
Amen.
Good.
People will say stuff that hurts you and they don't mean to do it. People will kind of want to hold you accountable for things, but they'll do it, like Jim said, they won't do it with you in mind. And they don't exactly mean to hurt you, but they do anyway. And you have to realize that they have your best interest at heart when they do something like that.
Sometimes we don't prepare to be able to do that. If I have to come to you, boy, it's going to be a day or two of praying and searching, and God give me the right words that is you speaking and not me. That's how I got to come to you. If it happens in church, I'm never going to say a word to you right now, because you won't want to hear what I say, because I'm mad, I'm upset, and I'm hurt. But give me a few days and let God work it out in me first.
Well, the worst thing you can do is when you hear about something that needs to be addressed, is go straight and address it.
No. I made too many mistakes doing that.
We've all done that.
Yeah.
Okay.
As a Christian that wants to learn to grow, they should want to be corrected in things. If I've done something, I would want somebody to come, and if they did come, I probably would repent, but you'd have to pray about it and realize that they're just trying to help you. But as a growing Christian, you should want to be corrected in some of the things.
Well, that's the thing about it. I mean, if you start a job, there's certain aspects of it that you're going to do wrong and you're going to have to be corrected at. Well, you're not. If somebody comes to correct you, you're not going to get mad and leave your job because of it. But if somebody corrects you in church, the first thing you do is go out the door. And there's something wrong with that, because in reality, this is more important than your job is.
You get hurt in church, that's the worst hurt you'll ever have on the Lord.
That's right. It really is. But the worst thing that we can do is leave out of anger. When somebody is trying to hold us accountable for something that we really might be wrong in.
We were on our way to church just a while ago, and we had to make a few stops. And we passed the house, and I told Doug, I said, boy, they quit coming to church all of a sudden. I won't say who it was, and Doug said, well, I heard it's because of this. And he said, well, if you look hard enough, you can get offended at anything and make an excuse not to come to church.
That's right.
And, that's, I can look at you can look at, y'all can look at me and say, well, Renee does this, I ain't going to church.
Well,
If you want to.
I can find a reason to get offended before we leave here today.
When we make it about me, that's what will happen.
That's right. Key word there, I. make it about me, and I'm going to get offended.
I
Okay.
always say I'm not gonna let somebody else knock me out of getting a blessing. Somebody's not gonna keep me from coming to church.
Well, that's the attitude we've got to have, ain't it? Okay, so the question is this. Who's sitting with you in life? Be it beside you at church or out in the world. In the world, the people are not going to hold you spiritually accountable, and that's really where you need to be accountable the most. Okay, point number 3. You got to be careful where you sleep. I've been a Sunday school teacher here at Cornerstone for the adults for 8 years now. And one thing I've learned is this. Baptists can sleep with their eyes wide open. Can't they, Eric?
You're right.
Okay, sleep, we said, is inactivity, relaxation, suspended consciousness. We cannot afford to come in here and be inactive in this church. What happens when we start becoming inactive in the church?
People start falling down the window.
That's it. We fall asleep, don't we? We can't afford to have our conscience suspended. We cannot afford to relax when it comes to raising our children and raising them in church. It's easy on Wednesday nights to say, I'm too tired. But we cannot afford to do that. We're all going to miss every now and then, but we're supposed to be there. We can't afford to relax in our marriage. We can't afford to relax in our finances. We cannot afford to relax in relationships. We cannot afford to fall asleep in any of these situations. Everybody in here knows that I like drag racing. I go down there and race fairly often. As a driver, you're going to get beat sometimes. But when somebody walks up to you after you get beat, the worst thing that you can say is, I fell asleep. That means you did not do your job as a driver. The race is won and lost on the starting line. And when you fall asleep, it means that you are not paying attention to the job that you were given. And when you fall asleep concerning your children, that race is lost. And when you fall asleep concerning your finances, that race is lost. And when somebody walks up to you and says, what happened in this aspect, this area of your life? Sometimes you're going to say, I fell asleep, and it's shameful. It means that you did not do your job. Susan Johnson, she's about to fall asleep on it. Okay, there are areas of your life that you cannot afford to fall asleep in. Why? Because when you do, that area of your life falls out the window. Do not fall asleep in areas of your life that really matter. Lastly, you've heard of the rich young ruler. You've heard of the man with the withered hand. You've heard of the prodigal son, his father, his brother. But who can tell me all their names? You can't do it because their name's not in there. Now you've heard of the young man who fell asleep and fell out of the window. His name's Eutychus. Why did they put his name in there? It's for sure an important lesson. Why is it not?
His name means fortune. It means that he was blessed, that he was in a position that somebody helped him.
Excellent. Listen to what I got wrote down here. It's all in his name. Eutychus means fortunate. His name means fortunate, and Eutychus was fortunate. He was fortunate because he messed up in church, and there was a man of God that when he didn't give up on him. Which is exactly what Jim said. Paul saw him sleep. He saw him fall out the window. And now look at verse 10. And Paul went down and fell on him and embraced him and said, trouble not yourselves, for his life is in him. Paul cared about Eutychus, didn't he? And Eutychus was fortunate because he did. And did you know, here at Cornerstone, we're fortunate people because we care about each other. And we've got a pastor who cares. And we've got people in the church who will give you that text. They'll hold you accountable. We're also Eutychus. We're fortunate That's exactly what his name was.
You know, what struck me when I was reading that a minute ago, when you first, that he fell on him. That was compassion. I mean, he was hurting that this young man was dead. And he didn't just go out there and lay hands on him, and they didn't gather hands. Paul fell on him. He fell into his life and put everything he had into it.
Well, I thought about this yesterday when I was writing all this out. And, if I was up here and somebody fell out the window and got hurt, the first thing I would say is, bring him back in here, we'll pray for him. But Paul went to him.
Amen.
And that's the exact example that we're supposed to live our lives by. When we see somebody fall, we go to them. What does it say? Go to your brother. If that don't work, go take a brother with you. And if that don't work, take the whole church.
Amen.
It don't say wait for them to come to you. It says for you to go to them. And that's exactly what Paul done.
Love moves first.
Huh?
Love moves first.
That's right.
Those injuries were so serious too. I mean, he fell. He wasn't sick with a disease that you could pray over and hope the disease went away. He had injuries. I was, well, you remember probably 14 years ago, I was pumping gas at the Wilco, and right across the road where the pantry used to be there in Perkinsville, a little boy ran through the parking lot and the truck hit him. And I heard the truck hit him, and when it did, it was like seeing something on a movie. It didn't even seem real, and I didn't know what to do. And Chad Marsh was there, and he grabbed me by the arm. He said, "Go pray for him. Go pray for him." And that was the hardest thing. It felt so useless to go pray over because he was bleeding out of his ears, his eyes, his nose, his mouth. I thought he was going to die, and it felt like, I'm praying over this. It don't even say he lived and ended up being good friends. And saw him get saved here and everything. But it's hard to pray when you see something that looks that hopeless.
Well, that's what we was talking about this morning. They told on the news that a baby had that coronavirus. And if I remember what you told me right, it was getting worse and worse, and all of a sudden it stopped and went away, right? And we was talking about it, and I said somebody prayed for him. Somebody prayed. They had the forethought to do that. And, a lot of time we'll say, pray for such and such, pray for such and such, and I'll, in my mind, or maybe just as a whisper, I'll pray for them, and then it's forgotten. But that's not what we're supposed to do, is it? We're supposed to pray for them until the burden goes away. But I failed to do that. Okay, so Eutychus was fortunate. That's what his name means. Paul saw him. He went to him. And he fell on him. And he prayed for him until life returned. In other words, he didn't give up. And when we see somebody fall, when we see them sleep and fall, whatever, we pray for them. And we pray without ceasing, and we do not give up concerning it. So anybody that has a pastor in church, a deacon, an accountability partner, your spouse should always be an accountability partner to you. Somebody that will go to you in life and pray for you in whatever situation it's in. You are fortunate. Anybody. You are fortunate. You are blessed beyond measure. And we shouldn't fail to thank God that we have these people in our lives that are willing to do this.
Lord, we love you. Thank you so much for your word today. Thank you for the morning you put on Kevin. And Lord, got these thoughts, Lord, we pray you just keep sending them our way. Help us to learn and help us to stay awake spiritually. God, and Lord, be aware of what's around us. God, help other people, Lord. I pray that just use us. Use the rest of the service for your